Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. Today on the show, we have April. April, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing all right, and yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show. I've been following your career for a long time. I think you're doing some of the most interesting work in tech right now, and I'm really, really excited to talk about it. So for those of us who aren't familiar, oh no, I have echo. So for those of us who are not familiar with your background and your career, what are you doing for work right now?
Hold on, give me 1 second. I am picking up everything you're saying. Sorry.
Okay.
Plus like twice.
Oh no.
Yeah, I have an echo. One moment.
I had the YouTube open in the background, so it started playing again.
You hear it?
Well, I had it for a minute, but it's off for me now.
Okay. How did you turn yours off? Because I can't even adjust my.
I had to mute the YouTube channel. Like if you've got the
Oh,
YouTube open in the background somewhere.
oh, I'm still getting it.
Let me check if there's anything I can. I don't think there's anything that I have on that would be going through to you. See, the
Let
chat's
me
not getting an
see,
echo.
because this is the only screen I have open. Nope. This is interesting.
Okay.
It's only me. 1 second, everyone. I'm trying to get to my audio settings to see if there's anything weird happening in there. And
Did it just start when we went live?
speak for me.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Are
I
you?
turned I turned down. There's two Zooms on my computer. That's weird. One says Zoom, one
Oh,
says Zoom meetings. All right, we're good to go.
all
So
right.
re-say what it was that you said.
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. So,
Oh, no problem.
um, yeah, the question I had is for those of us who aren't familiar with your career, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing right now in your job?
Yeah, so right now I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft with the spatial computing technology team. And I work on a majority of my job is creating content to help new
Mm.
people learn about the mixed reality space, as well as some of the different tools that we offer with Microsoft. And in addition to that, engaging with the developer community, seeing what people are building, and just helping people in general with getting started.
Yeah, and mixed reality is interesting because I feel like so mixed reality is that kind of an umbrella term for like virtual reality, augmented reality, kind of anything you would do with either a device like a headset, like an Oculus Rift, or even the stuff that you would do on your phone with like tabletop games where you play with your camera and stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's a spectrum. That's how you can look at it. So on one side you have augmented reality, and then on the other end you have virtual reality. So with augmented reality, you're able, the spectrum kind of like depends where you're on the spectrum, but with augmented reality, that's when you're able to do things with, as you mentioned, your devices, while also more or less blending in the real world.
Mm.
As far as virtual reality on the other end, that's when like you're fully immersed in a environment, and you don't have that access to the real world around you. So that's when you get more into your VR headsets.
Right.
Somewhere in the middle is spatial computing, and that's the area that I work in. And with spatial, you start getting into an area where your holograms are going to be spatially aware as well, which
Ooh.
is really cool and something that I've been working on lately. So I would say probably one of the most coolest examples I've seen of that is when I met the folks over at Magic Leap for the very first time and I tried one of their devices. There were these like little like knights that like appeared in the actual room,
Yeah.
and they were just like fighting with each other, and they actually knew what was actually real in the actual world, so they would avoid
Oh,
actual objects, and they could like hop on top of stuff and do things. So it was pretty cool. That's more so the area that I typically focus on, but I do things within VR as well, and AR too. But
Yeah.
yeah, so
What a fascinating space. And I feel like we've seen a couple things like this. Like, isn't the new Mario Kart kind of the spatially aware, where you set up the cart in your living room and then you can like crash into your coffee table and stuff?
yeah, I believe I've seen that. I'm not big on gaming like at all, but I believe I've seen that in videos. But if that's the premise of it, then yeah, that's essentially what it
Nice.
is yeah, making your hologram spatially aware
That
and
is
whatever. Yeah.
that feels so much like the future. And that, so that's something that to me feels like really unapproachable. Like if I was going to try to do that, I don't even know where I would start. And
Mhm.
so like, is this a space that you would recommend for people to get into and try?
Yeah, I honestly would say give it a try. I've only been working in this space since the summer of 2019. So I myself am still pretty new to it. And as time has gone by since then until now, there are way more resources available on the internet for how to get started, whether you're doing some of the learning paths on Unity.
Hmm.
I'm a Unity person, so I can't speak to working within Unreal or with web. But Unity, I know, provides different tutorials that you can take a look into.
Nice.
And then also with Microsoft, we do as well. So aside from our mixed reality documentation and our journey paths for folks who are getting started, I have a police car going by, so sorry about that. But we have that to help you get started. And then I also authored 2 Learn modules on Microsoft Learn that are also available for getting started. And our mixed reality team has done the same thing as well.
Nice.
So it depends on where you land for learning, but I would highly, highly suggest starting with learning C#, if anything.
Okay.
And then from there, start learning Unity if that's your chosen platform, or Unreal. And then from there, start to get into the concepts of what
Okay.
mixed reality is and dive a little deeper with what you can do with that.
Very cool. And so do you see this as being like, it seems like we're seeing more and more of this. So do you see this as being a growth area in tech where there's going to be a lot of hiring and opportunity?
Yeah, and it's actually an area that we classify within my organization at Microsoft as emerging tech, if you will.
Okay.
So it's one of those things where within recent years, we've started to see more and more companies create products, if you will, and tools and software around it. It's like that brand, it's in a sense, it's like that brand new thing, but it's also
Hmm.
not brand new. This technology has been around for years. It's just that more so in recent years, more folks are starting to get involved with developing in that space or even creating in that space. And so as more companies come out with even more advanced technology in that area, you're
Hmm.
going to see more folks start to learn those skills. And then you'll see more jobs open up. And hopefully in a post-COVID world, you'll see even more of that opportunity to find different companies to work with. But
Absolutely.
it's definitely an emerging technology at the moment.
Yeah. And that's kind of exciting too, because, one of the things that can feel a little daunting, especially for someone new in the industry, is it feels like there are a whole lot of people looking for that first shot and not a lot of jobs. And
Yeah.
so it sounds like there's an opportunity here where companies are just starting to adopt mixed reality. So there aren't a lot of people who could say that they are
Mhm.
senior spatial
Yeah.
computing engineers, right?
Right,
Nobody's been
right.
doing this for more than a year or two.
Yeah.
So that's it. What a great opportunity to come in and be one of the first
Yeah.
to be an expert before experts are really commonplace.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And for the folks who have been working in the space, since the dawn of time, they're also really good resources for learning and getting started. It's just that the number of folks who have been doing it for years is significantly smaller than the folks who just started working in the space within the past like 5 years or so.
Yeah. Yeah. That is super exciting. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think like Your career is fascinating to me because you've managed to get to this amazing job at one of the best known companies in the world. You're working with this bleeding edge technology and doing these really incredible groundbreaking things. And you come from a non-traditional background, right? Like your master's degree is in luxury fashion, right?
Yep.
So I would love to hear a little more about that story. How did you end up going from working in luxury fashion to just getting into tech at all?
Yeah. So like most folks in college, some of us have to work. And so I took on a part-time job working in the luxury retail space because I figured, oh, sorry, that was my phone. Because I figured that if I am going to have to work now, then I might as well do it somewhere that I like. So I started working in retail, but at that point, I didn't have any aspirations to work in fashion. It was a way for me to make money and get discounts on clothes. Mm-hmm. But as retail has this thing where it kind of like sucks you in, and next thing you know, you wake up and you've been there for like 5 years. And that's what happened to me, because over time I started to fall in love with it. And I was working in menswear as well as visual merchandising. And as time went on and I finally graduated from undergrad, I started to more so have a reality check with my potential financial prospects of working in that space and how long it would realistically take to get where I wanted to be. And the fact of the matter is that either I wouldn't be making as much as I would prefer, or it would take me just a very, very long time to get to that level. So I turned towards tech because I also had a certificate in business project management from undergrad. And at the time, I only thought of project management from a business perspective. But when I was doing my job search, everyone was asking for IT experience. And I'm like, my professors never mentioned this at all. So I felt a little discouraged because I said, I'm not technology illiterate, but it's also not something that I have on paper that I can take to, a recruiter or an employer and say, look, I understand computer. So, what I ended up doing was finding an internship. And when I interviewed for that internship, I made sure to mention how everything I had did in fashion could be transferred over to the tech industry. So having transferable skills was definitely helpful. Yeah. And then during that very first interview for that internship with the woman who became my manager, I had made it very clear that I was also looking for something permanent and that this wasn't just like a 6-month internship and then I go back to like living life. I made it clear that, I want a career, and literally in, 5 months of being in that 4 or 5 months of being in that internship, I got a full-time offer. And from there, that's really where things kicked off. But I did have a stint where I went back to fashion for a bit. And I was also in the midst of completing my master's degree in luxury fashion management because I said, I just want to work in fashion now. Reality hit. Yeah. And the same thing came back around for me, whereas it was like, that's this financial part's not going to be the best. So I took a massive pay cut when I left tech and went back to fashion. And I got burnt out because I was working 2 jobs just to equate to the income I had from when I was working in tech. And it was literally this sort of schedule. I would wake up early in the morning, go to, I worked at Club Monaco and did visuals there, go to Club Monaco, do visuals. And then from there, I would go to Equinox because I managed the retail store at Equinox. And I would spend all day there. And then sometimes from there, depending on the schedule, I would go back to Club Monaco and work, there until the evening. But it was always some sort of like rotation. And then plus I was doing school. So as you could imagine, that is a lot, became overwhelmed. I'm not the type that asks for financial help. So it took a lot of me to ask my parents at that time to help out. So they started helping out, but then I said, okay, I can't rely on anyone to pay any of my bills. So I came back to tech. And, time went by. I had different roles in tech. And, now today I'm here with Microsoft. So, taking chances is one thing I'm a big fan of. I've taken way too many chances, but I feel like that's really a way for you to learn that what isn't going to work out.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point, and I think that's like that willingness to take risks and be willing to throw yourself all the way into something it makes such a big difference.
Yeah,
because if you only go halfway in, then you're hedged and you can't like fully embrace something. So I love to see when somebody's like, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try.
Yeah. And I like to tell folks, I'm like, I know some folks, they're hoping to transition into tech like now. And I'm like, I've done it twice. So,
yeah.
So if I can do it, then I feel like other people can also do it. Cause I didn't have a technical background. So I feel like others can also do it as well.
Well, and you said something that I think is so critical that I'd love to dig into a little bit more, which is you said when you were having that interview, one of the things that you talked about was your transferable skills.
Yes.
How all the things that you worked with in fashion were going to transfer into a job in tech.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what some of those skills were and how they transferred?
Yeah. So the internship that I received was in IT project management, ironically, because I had no IT experience, but I had project management experience. So during that interview, I tied a lot of what I did as a visual merchandiser into managing a project, because visual merchandising, for those who don't know what that is, it's if you ever go into stores or look at the store windows and everything looks pretty and wonderful and all the shirts are folded perfectly and all the in-store displays are cool and awesome, that's what I did. So you don't just go right into it. There's a plan as well that's involved. And so it takes a lot of planning, a lot of execution, and a lot of that relates to project management. So I tied in a lot of that aspect. And then I also tied in my customer service skills as well, which is also a really big one, because as a project manager, you're essentially the face of the project and you interface a lot with customers, or stakeholders, if you will, whether they're internal or external. So being able to work with various personalities, being able to speak with folks who are higher than you in terms of the leadership scale, if you will, and just overall in general, having communication skills was really big. So I feel like working in luxury fashion was probably like the best way to get that experience, because everyone's privileged. So working with the luxury audience is it's very niche, I would say. And you really develop a way to communicate with folks. So bringing those two areas of where I worked in was very, very helpful with translating that to how I could relate that to working as a project manager, even in the tech space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like it's so important to bring those sorts of things up, because what you talked about, like, how do you talk to somebody who's in a position of authority? Like that ability to manage up is so important. And it's so easy, for a lot of people I know who have worked in retail or they worked in restaurants, you've developed that skill. When you deal with an irate customer, that's a valuable skill. And if you just brush that off as going, oh, well, I just used to work in a restaurant, you're selling yourself so short.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like if you think about it, hopefully people don't do this too often, but like even at restaurants, how many times have you gone in and just disliked something and wanted to like tell your server like, oh, this was bad, can you take it back? Like, that's what we deal with for those of us who work in retail and the restaurant industry. But over time, you find a way to overcome those battles, and I think it really does build a tough skin, but it also builds up your communication skills with people. Absolutely.
I think that's such a like incredible thing to just focus on, like really dig into what have you done in your previous role that already prepared you for what you're about to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that on that, like I feel like the dealing with difficult people is a pretty like headline banner kind of thing. But one that I'd love to ask is like, what's a skill that crossed over? Because I mean, you've got experience from like you have one degree in public policy, one degree in luxury fashion. What would you say is the skill from a non-tech career or kind of experience that was most surprising, that's been really useful to you in tech?
I would say there's two actually, because if you look at both degrees, my first degree that I got for my bachelor's, it was international business. Oh, no. Global business and public policy, which is international business. So a lot of the knowledge that I acquired as it relates to the business space and how you run a business, that is actually very, very huge, especially in the area that I work in within cloud advocacy, because it's not just us creating videos or writing tutorials. Right. You have to truly understand the business needs and how what everything that you're doing rolls up into what the business goals are. So I know with some folks, it's a little harder to grasp that when they are starting within their first corporate role. Even for something such as like social media, for example, you have to adhere to a voice and branding and guidelines when it's coming from like a corporate account, for example, which you do in your personal life, that's that. But when you're doing something, in my case, if I were to do something like a Microsoft channel, I need to ensure that I'm also in alignment with how the company presents itself. So there's the business side. And then for the luxury and fashion management side that I have, we had a period of time in our program where we had to end up learning like the Adobe Creative Suite and branding as well. So even though I hated working in Adobe, especially Illustrator at that time, it was one of those things that was really helpful nowadays, also with branding, because I mean, I can't tell you like how many times I use any of the Creative Cloud programs at today. Literally before you and I started chatting today, I was in Premiere Pro editing videos. So a lot of what I learned in that grad program, I'm doing today. And then also from that branding aspect, it's helped me develop a way that I present myself to the world that also that also creates a sort of familiarity whenever you see something that I create. And it's like, it's like you can look at it and say, oh yeah, April did that. I think that's also very, very helpful as you're also in your job search as well, because it does create a sense of cohesion in the way you present what you're doing, primarily if you're working in advocacy, I would say, or like as like developer evangelism and things of that nature. But yeah, between having business acumen, and knowing how to use creative tools and branding were like I guess that's three things. They're like the three things that I would say I didn't expect to bring over into working in tech, but they play a really big role in what I do today.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the idea of being able to bring a consistency to work, I think is such a, you can always feel it when somebody has a kind of a signature spin on the way that they present to the world. And we don't always notice it. We just kind of in the back of our heads, we go, oh yeah, I recognize this work. And so being able to create that field, being able to create that consistency, that's a superpower. I think.
It is. It truly is.
And like kind of on that note, you're kind of a polymath, like in the sense that you've got this career in tech where you're working in mixed reality. You're kind of on one bleeding edge there. You are also like, to look at your social media, you're doing so many things. You make your own clothing. You do photography. You are writing books on Python. Like you've got so much material in so many different directions. How do you, like, I have two questions about this, but the first one is how do you approach learning so many different things?
Yeah. So a lot of it stems from my childhood. My parents were the sort of parents that let me try and do whatever I want. I didn't have any constraints over any of the activities that I wanted to try out. I think that's very, very, very impactful as you get older, at least for me, as I got older. And that carried over into my adulthood because I had so much freedom when I was younger. And so now that I'm an adult, whenever anything seems cool that I want to try out, I carry that mentality of, okay, how do I get started to try it? And, not everything that I do, I end up falling in love with, but I can at least say I tried it. So for that, I often get asked that question. I'm like, you can thank my parents for that, honestly.
Cool. So, and then the second question that I have is that, I think there's a lot of times a sense of pressure when you are on social media in tech to, you'll see people stick to tech. And so I'm personally very opposed to this, but I love seeing that you bring your whole self into your Twitter profile. And so I'm curious, how do you think that has impacted your ability to grow in your career?
Yeah. So I will say, to start off, to not be your whole self is exhausting. I don't know how people can have multiple internet versus real life personalities. I think it's not worth doing that because it's tiring. Can you imagine if you had to be two people? So for me, I think it's very important that I do present all my interests and who I am, because when it is time to move into a particular role, for example, assuming, let's say that, the team you work with, they've been familiar with your, your online content and your online presence. But then if you start your first day at work and it's like, who is this? Because they're not the same person. Right. Like, that's a problem, So I feel that for me to share what I do online, for me to interact with folks and engage with folks the way I do online, when people do meet me in real life, it's like, oh, it's the same person. And it's that consistency across the board, because I don't have the time to to switch personalities depending on the situation. But I will say it's also been very helpful, because it's also what people who I've worked with as managers, they expect and anticipate, and they like it. Which is also really great as well. I'm not asked to, tone this down a little bit, or, we thought that, you would do it like this, but we're not really seeing that. It's like, I've gotten hired in both of my roles at Microsoft, because working in mixed reality is my second role at Microsoft. I got hired in both roles with the expectancy to bring who I already was to the space that I was working in. So I will say it's definitely worked in my favor.
That is, I think that's such an important thing too, because, the fact that you got brought in because of who you present online, that's a differentiator. If we're looking at 5 people with an identical resume, the thing that we're going to make a decision on is which person looks like they're going to make a bigger impact. Yeah. And if you can see the whole person, then you can better assess that impact. And so if 3 people have edited themselves down to just their tech chops, and, one person is being an entire person, I'm immediately more interested in talking to the person who isn't just going to argue with me about whether or not we should use, semicolons or not.
I knew you were about to say that. Like, yeah.
But yeah, so I think I love this. So we've got a couple questions coming in from the chat that I'd love to ask. Somebody has asked, what kind of schedule do you follow on like a day-to-day, or do you follow a schedule?
I am a highly organized schedule person, because if I don't have a schedule, things are forgotten. And I always say, if it's not on my calendar, I don't know about it. I will preface this and say, I did at one point in life try to not be so scheduled, and everything fell into shambles. So I've definitely readopted organizing everything. And a typical day for me, if we're talking about super typical, I wake up, I sit on Instagram and Twitter for about, I wake up around usually 6. That's just my internal clock. Sit on Instagram and Twitter till about 8:30. I know that's bad. And then from there, I get up, shower. It's 9 o'clock. My day starts at 9. I don't prefer, and I usually don't take meetings before 9. And depending on what the day is, usually I'm working on content. So some days I'm writing tutorials. This week, yesterday, for example, I even tweeted that I was recording like 14 videos over the span of the entire day. So, one day might just be all recording videos. Another might be all focused on editing videos. Like that's what I'm working on today. And I like to just really focus on one thing in one day. Of course, sometimes I'll need to do multiple things in a day. And of course, there's meetings as well. But I try to minimize what I'm working on for work each day. So that way I'm not like switching gears every so often and just in like, this 8-hour workday.
Yeah.
After that, it also depends on the day it is. Since I'm writing a second book now, sometimes I just focus on that. But for the weekends, I don't do anything work related. I don't do anything tech related unless it's like for my book, of course. But usually that's when I sew, I do any sort of crafting. Prior to these times, I would go out and hang out around LA. But that's really how my life is run.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the honesty of that answer of like, spending time on social media in the morning. I feel like a lot of people just skip that part, right? And I mean, I'm the same way. I wake up early and then the first thing I roll over and I grab my phone and then I just look at Twitter.
Yep. I'm there between that and YouTube videos because also I don't spend all day during like the day on social media. Right. I know some folks, it's a comfort zone for them while they're working. But for me, once that 9 o'clock hour hits in the morning, I might hop on Twitter for like a scrolling session of maybe 3 tweets or to respond to any like notifications. And then I'm right off of it. So that little period that I have in the morning of Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, that's really the extent of my like social media engagement for the day.
No, that's probably good. I find that if I'm disciplined, I do the same. But when I'm not disciplined, I'll like have it open in another tab and it just tanks my productivity because every time I get even a little bit bored, I'm like, maybe I'll just scroll for a minute and then I get nothing done.
Don't do it.
So another question from Arjit is a degree important for a job or is skill enough to get a job in a big company? So I feel like this is actually a great question because did your degrees play a factor in you getting your Microsoft job, even though they weren't CS degrees?
No, not at all. But what I will say when people ask this question is it highly depends on the company that you're applying to, because there's no one answer for every single company in tech. That is something that I would highly suggest you do as much research in as you possibly can when you're in that applying phase for a job. Now, for my particular roles that I've had at Microsoft, I'm not 100% sure if either of my degrees were evaluated. However, there was more so a heavy emphasis on my project management background, which was experience. So I worked in the project management space for 5-6 years before I came to Microsoft. So, I definitely had the experience in that. And then coming into cloud advocacy, a lot of it was focused around my creating content abilities. And then realistically, when I came into the XR space, by that point, only had 6 months of working in anything mixed reality in my own free time. So it wasn't as though I had, massive big projects and, I've deployed this to this platform and then I've had 80 million people do it. Like, no, I didn't have any of that. And I also didn't have a degree in it as well. So a lot of it was learning once I got hired. But, when people are looking for potential hires, it comes down to what that role entails and what the job description is. So for me, working in advocacy, it's that engagement with the community. Can you build a community? Can you engage a community? But then there's also that technical part too, because the only way I can talk to community is by understanding the tech. Right. So, coming into MR, I had a Python background, but I didn't have a C#. So, I had that drive on my own for 6 months to learn everything before coming into Space. And by that point, my now manager, we had already connected in real life, as well as my skip manager, who is his manager. So since I'm very open about my learning, they always saw what I was working on and learning.
Yeah.
So when it came time to do this internal transition at Microsoft, there was no need to bring up this portfolio of projects because they now have seen 6 months of me actually doing stuff. They didn't have to go, find any of it because it was just there.
So what you're bringing up, I think, is such a fantastically important point. Whether you're doing it internally like you did, or externally, like we see folks tweet about their learning journeys, the 100 days of code, people on freeCodeCamp sharing as they learn, all of these different processes to not only try to learn something new, but to share what you're learning as you learn it. And as you just said, that makes such a big impact on your ability to get that opportunity. Because I think something that is really important about your story of getting into mixed reality is that you got there without a degree and without experience. So what you got that job on was proving your willingness to do the work. And I feel like that is one of the most valuable things. I know you weren't going in as a junior, but for all the people who are looking for their first role in tech.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Someone ring the doorbell.
Oh, no worries.
Just because I don't have to get up. 1 second, let me check the ring.
Sure. But for everybody watching here, if you don't have the opportunity to show a resume that has a bunch of work on it, if you don't have years of experience to support your lack of a resume, then you have the ability instead to demonstrate this work in public, to show this drive. You're doing the work, you're showing up repeatedly, you're willing to make that effort. And that is a huge differentiator.
Yeah, it does make a difference. And I would say a lot of what I've experienced definitely heavily ties to working in evangelism, if you will, because it is a very public role. You're very often in front of people. So it's something, whereas if that's the sort of area that you want to work in, there needs to be that social aspect to it, that ability to feel comfortable speaking with folks. And it's not always speaking to huge audiences. It can be really as small as a meetup, or, if you have any sort of group that, you present to maybe 20 people every so often. It doesn't have to be some massive audience that you have, but it is that comfort and ability to put yourself in front of folks and to help share knowledge with others. Because for me, in the area that I work in, we don't sell products within cloud advocacy, but we do expose people to technology. And that's why for me, living out loud online and what I'm doing in tech, it really played a big role in me getting to where I am now in cloud advocacy.
Yeah, I think that's a great outlook. So I think one other question that I have is to kind of turn around all of your experience, and let's talk to the people watching right now, because I think a lot of them are in the free code camp program and looking for that first opportunity. So we talked about social media presence, bring your whole self, be a full person. We talked about the learning in public, show your work. What other tips would you have for somebody who's looking for that first opportunity? How can they stand out if there are a lot of people applying for that same role?
Networking. Networking is how I got my very first role at Microsoft. I didn't cold apply. And I know for some folks, cold applying is when you apply to a position without any sort of connection or referral to anyone in that company. And I've done cold applying many times in the years I've worked in tech, but I've always found that networking to be the most beneficial. And I've also found it to be one of the quicker ways for me to find employment. But with networking, it's a two-way relationship. You do have to understand that. And you also should not be in a position just to use someone because they work at XYZ company. I would highly suggest developing some sort of relationship with the person first.
Yeah.
And then from there, I would say, if it feels right and if you're comfortable and if you're applying to, let's say, a role with their company, at that point, I think it's okay to reach out from a, hey, I want to apply to this. Can you tell me more about working with the company, so on and so forth. Usually, mostly, if you start the conversation like that, it'll probably end in the person themselves asking, do you want a referral? If the conversation doesn't quite go that way after a continued conversation about the company, feel free to ask. I mean, it doesn't hurt to ask, but I also feel like that should not be the very first thing you do upon meeting someone, is asking like, hey, can you get me a job at XYZ company? So networking is great. And it isn't something that's also instant gratification either.
Right.
I've known people that, I've known for years, and there wasn't a need to potentially ask for help on anything career related until like years later, for example. So it's something where you really want to foster that relationship. Don't just forget about the person, after 10 minutes of having a conversation with them at a conference, for example. Like, continue there, check in on them, chat about really anything, but having that relationship first before having that need to ask for something is super crucial. And networking also helps with, getting that resume on top of the other resumes in the pile as well. But also recognize that it's not always a guarantee that you're going to be hired. I've, when I was looking for my first role at Microsoft, I interviewed with a couple other companies, and they were all from networking opportunities, which, I never applied to any company during that time. It was more so I connected with folks online, and, they were kind enough to refer me for an interview, and I had interviews. And this was like pre where I'm at now times. Like, I didn't have like the 22K followers that I had now. I was still in like smaller numbers. So it wasn't a matter of being some like big known person. It was just connecting with the right people. And I think that's like a really great way to bump up your resume. I know not everyone's comfortable doing that, completely understand. So if that's the case, I would say anytime companies hold any type of events or workshops where you actually have the chance to speak with people who work at the companies, that's a great opportunity to learn more about what's available, and then hopefully, get to know someone that way. And if communicating, engaging with others is just 100% not your thing because you're not comfortable doing that, I will say you will definitely need, most likely, a strong portfolio to help you really get noticed. And even with that, make sure whatever you're presenting your portfolio is something that you would feel that you would feel 100% proud of if you had to present it to like a CEO, for example. It needs to be something that is, it doesn't have to be 100% fully polished and deployed somewhere that people are downloading. It's great if it is, but it needs to be something that's polished and relatable even to what the company does as well, because it then puts the hiring manager in that mindset of, okay, they already don't work in this particular area, so that learning curve would be super low. So yeah, let's bring them in. So hopefully that tackles for the people who are super social and then people who are not as social.
Well, and I think like, you bring up a lot of really, really good points here. So one that I just to repeat, like, networking is a long game. It's not something that you're going to say, oh, I want a job next week, let me start networking today. Think of it more like building friendships, right? Like you're trying to make connections to people, not because you want stuff from them, but because it's good to have friends. And then having more friends means later there's a decent chance you know somebody who knows somebody who can get you that intro. And so it's not a transactional thing. It's making your life better. You're finding people who have similar interests that you like talking to. So Peanut Butter in the chat has a great question about, it's a great name. But they ask, how are you connecting with others online? Like, especially now, given that we're in COVID times, we're not getting the opportunities where we could show up at a conference or a meetup and there are kind of the casual coffee chats. So if you're shy, if you're not super comfortable just like blasting into somebody's DMs and being like, hey, I'm Jason, where would you recommend going? Like, what are the strategies that you're using to meet people?
Yeah. So I will say I'm usually everywhere, so I don't want to give like 100% that response, but I can give that after I talk about for folks who aren't as social first. So
Sure.
I will help those people out first. There are significantly smaller communities that you can take part in, whether it's on Discord, for example, there's Slack. And I will say most likely, regardless of the area in tech that you work in or pursue to work in, there's some small community somewhere in one of these chatting platforms that isn't necessarily Twitter that you could take part in. And typically those are what I like to call safe spaces for the area of tech, where it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to really bring that beginner mentality there. And then you start to get more comfortable, hopefully, with people. So if you're not into like the really big groups of engagement with folks, there's that, which I find to be, definitely helpful for those who don't want to be in that one-on-one conversation with someone. It really becomes, like a group conversation at that point. So it doesn't feel as awkward sliding into someone DMs and having this like one-to-one conversation.
Yeah.
So there's that. For those though who do want to be everywhere, I would say, for me, because I do work in the XR space, alt space VR has been a place where I've met folks. I've gone to both large and small events in alt space, and I would say usually when I've gone to said events, it's probably because I did some talk or some sort. So I end up chatting with people afterwards because they have questions. So there's that. But for the larger alt space, hangouts where I didn't do any sort of presenting, people literally, they will come up and talk to you as well. And it's one of those things where you see a group of people talking, you just hover over there and see what's going on and, say stuff. So that's another way I've got to meet people. Twitch has been another way as well. When I was streaming, because it's so public, anybody hops into the chat, and then you start getting used to seeing the same people there. And then finally, there's Twitter. Whether it's a conversation that people are having around tech or around something like silly or something, that's a serious topic, that's an opportunity to start speaking with folks, and you can continue to start speaking with people. And even like Chloe, for example, I mean, I met her definitely before COVID, but we met on Twitter and like we're best friends now. So there's opportunity in a lot of social areas to meet folks, whether that's with large online gatherings or if they're even smaller and intimate.
Yeah, I think some of the ones that I've seen are like Discord. There are a lot of small community Discords popping up around different interest groups. And so if, I personally, I'm a big fan of just being part of conversations. Like on Twitter, it's really low stakes to reply. Don't spam replies, but like if somebody says something and it's something that you're working on or that you're interested in, respond. Like that's why, we're on Twitter. Twitter's not a broadcast only medium. It's a discussion medium. But if you're worried about Twitter, there are Discords that are much, much, much smaller groups. And a lot of them operate with really strict codes of conduct, so that they're not only like safe spaces in the sense that everybody's talking about the same things, but they're safe spaces in the sense that you will get bounced if you're out of line.
Yep, you will definitely be put out.
And that is also really, really important, because then you can go in and know that, nobody's gonna come down on you. Nobody's gonna go after you. Yeah. It's a place where people who are interested in things want to talk.
Yeah, even like you just brought up one, and I've been slacking on being as active on there just from life. But even like Dev2, for example, with that platform, I'm a moderator on there, and I've like seen different like moderator chats, and like it's like a serious thing. Like you just can't come on there and harass people and be this big like bully. Like that's just not allowed. So I feel like it's definitely more comfortable for folks who are trying to find that place where they can fit in and feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is absolutely fantastic, and it kind of plays into, there's a follow-up question from Jukam. I hope I just said your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. About how to make a reputation for yourself, and so what we've talked about with networking, there seems to be a point in my experience at least where somebody goes from being someone I've never heard of to being a name I've kind of heard to suddenly to being someone that I recognize. And I think that like there's some really notable stories. You mentioned Chloe. Chloe is a great example of this, where I feel like 3 years ago, I don't know that I'd ever met or heard of Chloe. And now she's doing these amazing things. She was just interviewing Bill Nye. Like
I was there too.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Interview with Bill Nye.
What an amazing thing that was, right? Like, and it's, and all of that kind of it builds this reputation. So where do you think that line is, and how do you move from networking to building a reputation?
So I will first start by saying, be mindful that there's two type of reputations.
Yes.
There's a good reputation and a bad reputation. And it is very easy, I will say, to build a bad reputation, depending on just the way things play out in, I'll say like the online space, for example. But there's also the good reputation side of it as well. But to build, because I won't talk about how to build a bad reputation because I won't help anyone here, but to build a good reputation, a lot of it comes down to what are you doing in the community? What are you doing in the tech space? And, are you using your skills for social good, for example? Are you able to, or are you engaging in topics that impact us? Like when I say us, I mean everyone who works in tech, for example. Are you doing things with your skill sets that are helping other people grow, for example? And then like once you make it in tech, are you doing things to help, uplift others and bring others along with you in that journey? So it's not like you must do this only one thing and now you have a reputation for yourself. It's, I think, a combination of things. But if you come to notice, the people who have good reputations in this industry, they're most likely folks who are doing things to help others realistically. I mean, I could probably give you a laundry list of things that people are doing, but it's really folks who are doing things to help others along either in their journey or, as I hate to say this phrase, but making the world a better place. So,
I mean, I'm fully on board with you for that. And I think like a way that it differentiates in my head is that, networking is an active activity. You are participating in networking. I'm reaching out to you. I'm talking in a community. Reputation is what happens when you're not there. What do people say when your name comes up in conversation? Does your name come up in conversation? And I think that reputation gets built on how people feel when you are networking. If I come into a conversation and I can manage to do something that makes you feel better, then later, if my name comes up, you're going to remember that our interaction was good. It had a positive outcome. And then you're going to say, oh, I like them. They were helpful. And if our interaction wasn't good, then the opposite happens. And we're never going to get all good or all bad. Like it's always going to be a blend, but we can always try to make sure that we're trending toward better. How can we think about the way that an interaction we're about to have is going to make the people on the other end of that conversation feel? Are we making people feel smart, capable, like they're going to get somewhere? Or are we trying to make ourselves feel smart and make them feel small? Those are all going to influence your reputation. And people talk about that. If you are present in a community, people will talk about you when you're not there. And you want to make sure that that's positive, that, they're.
And I would say even like, especially within the tech area, because there's just so many things happen, even folks who are, controversial and things that they share, being controversial, honestly, can have a negative or a positive connotation. And, it could be statements expressed that are controversial to one audience, but they're statements that help people in the long run, or it could be controversial things said that are super negative, which I'm sure a lot of us see on Twitter as well. So, I say that because it doesn't mean you have to be this bubbly, happy-go-lucky person 24/7, for example. I don't even think that's like a thing that is like realistic or authentic or human. But you can speak up as well on topics, especially if you feel very strong about something. But just also do keep in mind that how it's perceived by people, it's going to vary. You'll have people who love that you said certain things, and you'll have a subset of people that's just like, oh no, I don't like that they said this, blah, 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 blah. So it really goes both ways. But that also feeds into reputation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. So we're kind of drawn to a close here. So chat, this is your last chance if you've got any questions you want to throw in. In the meantime, April, is there anything that you want to direct people to, any links, any resources, anywhere that you want people to check out?
Yeah. So earlier I mentioned Microsoft Learn, really, truly great, especially for anyone that's interested in working either, at Microsoft or with Microsoft products and technologies. So check that out at docs.microsoft.com/learn. For people who want to be able to contribute and write content of any sort and do so in a friendly space, dev.to. So dev2 is a really great place to be. I happen to know both of the founders, and they're delightful people as well. And then one other thing, let me grab it from my bookcase. My book, Bite Size Python, for anyone that is learning Python or have learned Python or has anyone in their life that wants to learn Python, or even children that want to learn Python, because even though it was written for children, really anyone has used it. My book's a really great resource. You can find information about that in two places. Either on Twitter, I have it pinned as a tweet on my profile for Vogue and Code, and then also on my website, either aprilspeight.com or vogueandcode.com. It redirects to that website, to the same place. So on there, I have a page fully dedicated to my book, and that's where you can find links. And then also, if you are on Twitter, for example, click the link that's in my bio. It'll take you to a link tree that also takes you to how to get bite-sized Python. So you got some options there.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, April, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure of a conversation. I learned a ton. I hope that everybody watching has learned a lot as well. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think let's call this here. Okay. Any parting words for everybody before we wrap this up?
Yeah. When you feel like you're just over it and tired, just keep going. We all at some point have that feeling. I also don't think it's realistic for anyone to have never felt defeated or have failed at any point in their career. And I mean, I can give you a laundry list of times where I've definitely failed. Just know that it's human. Just know that you're also not alone. And also just remember, no one was born knowing how to program. Like, we all had to learn how to do it at some point. One other thing I would say is to also remember that you are on your own timetable and no one else's. I know it can get very discouraging sometimes to see, some folks say one day, I'm going to learn this thing. And then 3 days later, big news, I work at so-and-so company now doing this thing. And it's just like, how did they get there so fast? But, you don't know everything about that person. We all learn differently. We all learn at different speeds, but don't be discouraged by that. It really comes down to your own self and who you are. So, keep going, be happy for people, definitely, at least, but don't let it discourage you. Just, take your time if you need to.
I have nothing to add to that. That is a beautiful ending. So thank you all for hanging out with us today. Make sure you come back next Friday. We're going to be talking to Jordan Jackson, who's a vet that transitioned into tech. It's going to be a great conversation. If you'd like to hang out and build some code together, I learned something new in 90 minutes twice a week on Learn with Jason. You can check that out on learnwithjason.dev. We will see you next time.
Take care.